This week on Talk by Turner, we're looking at the opioid epidemic, why it started, how we got here, and what the future looks like. Policies out of the White House threatening to cut funding to overdose prevention programs have experts questioning the future of addiction treatment in the U.S., particularly when it comes to the opioid crisis. We're answering all your biggest questions about opioids within the context of the latest headlines. Let's get into it. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon, and you're listening to Talk by Turner. Talk by Turner dives deep into intellectual discovery while examining what's happening in our world right here, right now. Join us each week to hear from industry experts and published authors as they share their knowledge and insight on today's most important topics. Now, let's see who's on this week's episode. This week, we're welcoming Harry Wiland to talk as our expert guest. Harry is the co-founder of the Media Policy Center, a nonprofit dedicated to building better communities through creative content and localized outreach. He's the co-executive producer and director of the documentary film and public television series Do No Harm, which is also the title of his book that unearths the history and truth behind America's rampant opioid crisis. Harry has produced public television and multimedia for over 30 years. Harry, welcome to Talk.
Good to be with you.
All right, I'm
excited by it.
My first question is on the fact that more people die each year from an opioid drug overdose than in automobile accidents. And opioid overdoses made up 60% of overall overdose deaths in 2024. So my question, how did we get here, and why did the opioid epidemic start when it did, and what caused all of this?
That's a big question, and it deserves a big answer. It started in the 1990s when Arthur Sackler of the Sackler brothers went to his two other brothers who were both physicians, and Arthur was a big marketing person. And he said, there's a way to monetize pain. And they looked at him and they said, what do you mean? He said, well, I think if we can market pain relief on a large scale, we would find a new audience that really need to have some of that relief. So they went to work on Oxycontin. They formed a company called Purdue Pharma to be able to do this. Then Arthur came back when he was satisfied and said the way to do it is to appeal to primary care physicians. They're overworked. They don't read all of the material, but they follow through to their patients. So this is a campaign that he developed that cost over $200 million to acquaint the medical community in this country to Oxycontin. And it was a huge hit, probably more than they imagined. And in the beginning, there was tremendous acceptance, and distribution companies, pharmaceutical distribution companies, and Big Pharma flocked to it because it was a way to make a lot of money very quickly. And they set networks up. Their first target was the Middle West, Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, where there were a lot of poor people who many were laborers and miners, and they got hurt and they needed pain relief. And this experiment had to be validated, and it was validated by the FDA as being a non-habit-forming pain reliever. But their receipts and profits grew into the hundreds of millions of dollars almost instantaneously. That's how it got started.
In your book, Do No Harm, you look into the pharmaceutical industry and how they marketed Oxycontin to doctors and the public, which you just noted. Can you dive into how Big Pharma's actions contributed to the opioid crisis and what other systemic factors were at play in creating the environment for widespread opioid prescribing?
They made it look easy. They made you take some pills and the pain goes away and there's no downside. And in the beginning, a lot of people became addicted, but they were too afraid to say anything. And you know, what's the phrase? Denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial was something that came about where people refused to admit that they needed their prescription, and it overcame the pain that they were having. And that's, you know, the way it continued, but there was pushback. There were doctors who were saying, this isn't right. And they started a legal suit against Purdue Pharma in about 2004 that led to, in 2006, a settlement. But the settlement wasn't that large, and it was just sort of pocket change for Big Pharma. They put up with it. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, what's your opinion in terms of what could have prevented the opioid epidemic from, you know, becoming such a huge problem in the country?
You had to take a look at addiction and realize it was a disease, as Dr. Andrew Kolodny, who was my advisor on this project, especially on the book, and who wrote the foreword, that needed to be treated as such, and the acknowledgement that Oxycontin was an opioid and it was addicting. And they also, going back to the phrase, they made it too easy, they created a pain chart from 1 to 10, and they gave it to, it was on calendars and pamphlets and books, and it just became a part. It was in the doctor's office, how easy it was to find out. They would say, well, how much pain are you experiencing, Mrs. Smith? And Mrs. Smith would say, 4. Well, you know, I think you should take 2 aspirins, go to bed. And then somebody else would come in and say, it's 8. Well, here, I'm going to write you a prescription for Oxycontin. And then other people saw how easy it was. And that's also the time in the mid-20s, in the 2005, 2008, pill mills came into being, where people would go or sell their prescriptions to other people, and the illicit traffic became part of this epidemic.
Privatized healthcare system, how much is that a contributor to the opioid crisis?
Well, I wrote it's greed. It's a question of greed. It's good versus evil, because if you see the testimony, especially the Attorney General of Massachusetts at the time sued Purdue Pharma and talked about the lies that they were sending out, how it was non-addictive. And this was up until 2014 that they were denying any real downside on Oxycontin. Once it became too difficult to deny, they changed the format of its delivery and put Oxycontin in a gel form. But it was the same medicine with the same impact. It just took a bit longer to go into effect in someone's body. And if I may, just to answer another part of that question, the way opioids work, it goes into the brain. It's a disease of the brain, and it goes into the receptor cells. And just as there are receptor cells for ice cream and sugar and salt and alcohol, there are receptor cells for opioids.
How does the stigma of addiction hinder effective policy treatment access and long-term recovery?
That's the big question that continues today. I mean, there are people who look at it as a criminal offense to be an addict, that there's something wrong with that person, and that's why they became addicted. But I spent over 2 years interviewing people who were on and off drugs, and the most shocking thing was they were just like you and me. They were accountants. There was a doctor I interviewed who had dislocated his shoulder and started taking Oxycontin. And then when his shoulder got better, he couldn't stop. I mean, it takes away personal liberty. It takes away your control. And if anything, we need to have more compassion and empathy to look at it. It's a very difficult issue. And if we look at it as such, really on both sides, nobody's innocent in this. There are people who will say, let's set up shop like in downtown Portland, and that turned into a disaster most recently. So we haven't come to the solutions yet, but we need to work together on it.
Continuing on that theme, accessing affordable, effective treatment. Why has it been so challenging for those struggling with opioid addiction?
That's really a great question. Let me give you a little history. There is a place in Lexington, Kentucky, nicknamed Narco Farm, and it was the first public health institution that was built to deal with addicts. And a third of their population were volunteers, and 2/3 were criminals who had committed a crime as a result of being addicts. And so there were some things discovered, but the whole goal was, in a few years, we'll find a cure for addiction, and the country will be in better shape. That was 1933. Richard Nixon, in his war on drugs, closed that facility down because there was too much illicit drug traffic going on to those very people who were being treated. And today, you have experiments that work and you have experiments that don't work, like in Portland. I think we need to sit around the table. We need to talk to each other. We need to say one size doesn't fit all. Some people can just stop. Other people need to be on methadone. Methadone is a misunderstood solution, but an important one. It's called methadone treatment because it's not a cure. People come to a facility and drink some orange juice with a mixture of methadone in it, and that they're okay for the day. They're working on something now that would go into the arm and be metered slowly, so it would be weekly or even monthly, to control the high that's created by drugs. And the irony is, methadone is an opioid itself, but used properly, it will get to prevent the heroin high, or fentanyl high, and save someone's life too in the process.
Methadone treatment, has that been, I'm just curious on timing of that. Has that been used? How long has that been used? Like, what do you know the origins of that?
Methadone treatment came into being, let me see, in the late 60s, I think. It was developed at Rockefeller Institute in New York and also at Narco Farm. It got FDA approval about that time. About 500,000 Americans use it every day here. They say it's saved about 500,000. Pardon me. Can we start over? I made a
Yes.
mistake.
Yep.
Okay. Could you ask the question again?
Yeah. What's the origin of methadone treatment? Where is that? Where did that originate from?
Okay. Methadone treatment came about through the laboratories of a Dr. Creek. She was an amazing scientist at Rockefeller Institute in New York, and she worked with Narcofarm in Lexington, Kentucky, because they had a large enough population that she could do a cohort and experiment with methadone on amount of treatment, how many times a day, a week, a year someone needs to be injected with methadone. But it sort of knocks out the heroin high, and it is given to about 5 million Americans who are under. No, I'm wrong again. I apologize. Maybe you can make a cut. It's 500,000 Americans take it every day in the United States, and it started in the late 1960s, and I would say it saved millions of American lives in the process.
A group of doctors and academic experts recently warned lawmakers in a letter that decreasing funding to the CDC and other federal health agencies could have drastic and deadly effects, especially in high-risk areas of the country. Could you speak on what federal and state programs have been doing to help mitigate drug overdoses, particularly for opioid-related overdoses?
Well, I mean, Narcan now is available almost everywhere in certain states, and it's free, and it will stop an overdose immediately. It's an amazing drug that was created. I think we need more money to be spent, but to be spent judiciously. And again, both sides need to sit down and talk about what their challenges are and how they can help each other. And to know that this is not going to be solved overnight. It takes time. People are ill. There's Dr. Kolodny, who is the head of a research lab and a professor at Brandeis University, has been working on this since his first job at New York Health Department for 30 years now. And people like Andrew just need financial support to do experimentation and create the kind of research necessary. So I think we need more money, not less money.
President Trump has proposed cutting 56. Hold on. Let me start that question again. I want to make sure that I phrase that correctly. President Trump has proposed cutting a $56 million grant that teaches first responders how to use Narcan, which you noted. Even though experts have linked the drug to a significant drop in overdose deaths in 2024. My question, how much can this drop in overdose deaths be attributed to the wider accessibility and use of Narcan? And do you think the federal government should continue to fund programs like this?
Well, I think education is critical, and education in schools is critical on how dangerous drugs are now, especially with fentanyl. I think it is short-sighted to the very life-saving action is something that we need more of, not less of. I don't understand that, quite frankly. What do you save?
You save money, but yeah, what's the trade-off there?
Well, the trade-off isn't worth it. What's that phrase about you save one life, you save the world? There are a lot of lives that can be saved and need to be saved. And, people make mistakes, and we need compassion. And it's hard. It's very hard. I mean, when you're an addict, I've been blessed. I'm not interested in even experimenting. But you can't control your actions. You'll steal from your husband or wife. You'll commit a crime, you'll do things for the money to buy the drug. And again, if you looked at the film series I did for PBS, these are just regular people for the most part. They turn into the homeless, they turn into criminals, but they didn't start that way. And they go in and out. One of the most heartbreaking things is to see somebody who has kicked the habit 4, 5, 6 years and makes the mistake of saying, well, I'll just do it one more time. And now they're addicted again. Philip Seymour Hoffman, that great actor, was clean for 20 years. And he went to a party and he took a couple of pills and he died of an overdose that night.
What role should the media have in the opioid crisis when it comes to raising awareness and overall prevention?
Tell the truth. I mean, as journalists and scientists, the goal is to find the truth, and I think to relay that truth to our fellow citizens. It's really a calling, and I think that's the role that needs to be, and not to gloss over it or to treat it as a tabloid title.
You've been involved in public media for quite some time. Just curious, what's your reaction to recent events with an executive order that basically is seeking to cut funding to public media like PBS and NPR?
What are they afraid of? I mean, it's been an institution since media existed, the support from governments. And other things that we have done, we couldn't have done on commercial television. We did a series called Our Kids about narrowing the opportunity gap between rich and poor children. And Robert Putnam was the host. He's a Harvard professor. We did a series called Designing Healthy Communities about how to design communities that are safe and healthy. You don't see network time available for projects like that. And I think it's a necessary part of the education process. Not everyone can afford to find, a subscription to the New York Times or whatever, but they have free distribution through PBS and NPR. So I think
more mandated public service or community programming is what you're getting at, I assume.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge is to make people watch it, but so you have to be entertaining and professional. But I think it's part of our democracy to bring these issues to the public. And I think nobody does it better than NPR and PBS.
So, Harry, where do we go from here? What is the future of the opioid epidemic in America look like? How can listeners get involved in the overall battle?
Actually, I heard recently that a new family of drugs has been created. It's in testing that is non-habit forming. They're not opioids. Their molecules are different and they stop pain. And I think that's going to take a couple of years of testing. I think there's been some, believe it or not, results from these diet drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, if I pronounced it right. And that's amazing. And so there are things coming down the pike. And again, that's scientific research that needs to be supported, not cut. I mean, what's going on at NIH and NSF to cut these kinds of programs just doesn't make any sense to me.
What would you like? What's one thing you'd like listeners to take away from today's episode?
That's a great question. Don't be afraid. If you suspect anybody is invading your medicine cabinet, whether it's a child or a spouse, then don't accuse them, but try to sit them down, try to talk about it, and if they need help, encourage that. Again, compassion and empathy can go a long way. And there are wonderful, wonderful people out there who want to help, and there are NGOs and places to go where you can be treated as a human being.
Harry, where can listeners find you online?
You could go to the mediapolicycenter.org and see what we're up to and what we're looking to do. We have a new project now that's in development, and we could use some help in financing, called Imagine Democracy. It's an 8-part series. It's a book. It's the creation of what young journalists, we're calling young journalists the Democracy Corps, to take them out on the road and teach them about telling stories. It's really about passing the baton of our leadership to incoming generations, because they're going to make the world a better place. We've screwed it up in many ways.
Harry Wiland, he is the author of the book Do No Harm. Harry, thanks for joining us on Talk by Turner.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Enjoying episodes of Talk by Turner? Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe now. Watch us weekly on YouTube, Spotify, or the podcast service of your choice.